The stars had never looked so cold. Ethan Cross floated in the wreckage of Drop Pod 7, his oxygen recycler hissing a slow, steady rhythm against the silence of deep space. The pod had taken a plasma burst on entry, a lucky shot from one of Commander Zyrex Thorne's perimeter batteries, and now it tumbled end over end through the thin atmosphere of Kareth 9, a moon the size of a small continent, all jagged obsidian cliffs and poisonous yellow fog. Lucky. Ethan almost smiled at the word. He had 14 minutes of breathable air. One functional arm, the left one, his right shoulder had been dislocated when the pod spun. A combat knife, ceramic-coated so it wouldn't trigger Croth bioscanners. Half a nutrient bar. And the targeting beacon that no one was coming to answer, because his entire insertion team was dead. 14 minutes, he thought. That's enough. He hit the release on his harness and fell. Commander Zyrex Thorne stood at the center of the obsidian throne room, a vast, cathedral-like space carved from the living rock of Kareth 9's interior, and watched the holographic feeds with the patience of a species that had been conquering worlds for 11,000 years. Zyrex was impressive by any measure. 8 feet of dense, plated musculature, 4 upper limbs each ending in 6-fingered hands capable of crushing durasteel, a neural processing cluster 3 times the size of a human brain. He had broken 42 planetary governments. He had outlasted 3 galactic alliances. His fleet sat in orbit above Kareth 9, 200 warships, the assembled pride of the Croth Dominion, and beneath those ships, humanity's last coordinated military force was crumbling. The war had taken 11 months. Zyrex had expected 2. Humans, he had decided, were annoyingly difficult to finish. Commander. His second, Velarak, stepped forward. Velarak was nervous as Zyrex could read it in the shimmer of his secondary eyelids. The human insertion pod. We recovered debris. No survivors confirmed, but... Zyrex turned his great head slowly. Bioscanners at Perimeter 12 registered a heat signature. Approximately 2 minutes ago. Velarak pulled up the scan. It moved toward the central ventilation network. Zyrex studied the image. A small smear of warmth in the cold rock. One human. Alone, deep inside a fortress designed to repel armies. He made a sound that in Croft translated roughly as how quaint. Lock down the ventilation shafts. Send a patrol. Commander, perhaps we should consider. One human, Velarak. Zyrex turned back to his tactical feeds. Send a patrol. Ethan had stopped counting minutes. Counting minutes would make him think about air. Thinking about air would make him breathe faster. Breathing faster would use up his air. So instead he thought about geometry, the schematics he had memorized during the 18-hour briefing that now felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. Schematics of this fortress. The ones stolen by a Croft defector who had smuggled them out on an organic data chip embedded under his left mandible. The ones that showed exactly where Commander Zyrex Thorne held his senior war council. The ventilation shaft was tight. Even for Ethan, who was lean by human standards, 5'11", 170 pounds of fast-twitch muscle and scar tissue, it was a crawl. He moved on his elbows and his good arm, dragging his dislocated right shoulder along, and every time the joint ground against the metal floor of the shaft he let the pain wash through him and kept moving. Pain was data. Data was manageable. He heard the patrol before he saw them, for Croft soldiers, their heavy footfalls resonating up through the rock. They passed below a grating 6 inches from his face. He held his breath. Not for stealth. Because the oxygen recycler had run dry 40 seconds ago, and he was now working on whatever air was trapped in the shaft itself. He needed to move fast. He moved fast. The first guard inside the War Council antechamber never heard him. Ethan came through the ceiling grating like gravity had decided to take his side for once, 12 feet of drop, landing on the soldier's cervical plating in a way that the briefing documents had specifically described as a fatal structural weak point on Croth anatomy. The briefing documents were correct. The second guard turned. Ethan was already inside his reach, which was the only place to be when fighting something with a 6-foot arm span. The ceramic knife found the gap between chest plate and collar armor, another detail from those stolen schematics, and then there was no second guard. He took the soldier's respirator. Croth atmosphere mix was wrong for human lungs, too much nitrogen, wrong oxygen ratio, but the emergency rebreather built into their suits could be manually adjusted. He'd read that in the briefing documents too. He adjusted it. Took a breath. It tasted like metal and synthetic compounds, and it was the best thing he'd ever experienced. Then he straightened his dislocated shoulder against the wall, one hard shove, a white nova of pain, and then it was back in the socket, functional, and he walked through the inner door. Commander Zyrex Thorne looked up from his war table. The creature that entered his throne room was small. Absurdly small. Velarak had described the heat signature, but somehow Zyrex had expected more. This human stood barely chest-height on him, blood-streaked, wearing a torn infiltration suit, with a dead soldier's rebreather strapped across his face and a ceramic knife that looked, from this distance, like something a Croth child would use to peel fruit. Around the war table, 12 of Zyrex's senior commanders. All armed. All staring. The human looked at each of them in turn, calmly, the way one might scan a menu. Then he looked at Zyrex. Commander Thorne. His translator rendered the words in flat Croth standard. I have a message from Admiral Chen. Silence. Then Zyrex began to laugh, a low, resonant sound like stones grinding. Around him, his commanders joined in. Velarak did not. Velarak was watching the human's eyes. You, Zyrex said, are alone. In my fortress. On my moon. With a knife. He spread all 4 arms wide. Your fleet is destroyed. Your ground forces are broken. Your Admiral Chen is either dead or in my detention block. And you have come here, to me, with a message? Yes, sir. Ethan reached into the collar of his suit with 2 fingers and removed a small device, flat, circular, the size of a coin. He set it on the war table. She wanted you to see this. Zyrex picked it up between 2 fingers. Activated it. The holographic display bloomed open, and the throne room went very, very quiet. Because the display showed Kareth 9. From orbit. And around Kareth 9, in positions that had not been there 6 hours ago, that could not have been there 6 hours ago, sat 41 human warships. Not the broken remnants of humanity's fleet. New ships. Fresh ships. Ships that had come out of FTL at coordinates inside the Dominion's sensor blind spot, using a navigation technique that Zyrex's own admirals had declared physically impossible. And in the upper corner of the display, a timestamp. 47 minutes ago. Those ships, Ethan said, are already in position. You can't run, and your fleet can't maneuver fast enough to consolidate before they're engaged. He tilted his head slightly. Admiral Chen's terms, full cessation of hostilities, release of all prisoners, withdrawal from 43 occupied systems. You have 20 minutes to signal your acceptance. Zyrex stared at the display. His tactical brain, the one that had broken 42 governments, was working very fast. The math was correct. He could see it. The angles were catastrophic. Whoever had planned this had thought 11 moves ahead and then built a trap around the moves after those. He looked at the human in front of him. This small, blood-stained, oxygen-deprived creature who had infiltrated a fortress designed to repel armies, killed 2 of his guards, set his own shoulder without assistance, and then walked calmly into a room full of heavily armed alien commanders to deliver a message that made further resistance mathematically absurd. You could have sent a transmission, Zyrex said finally. We could have, Ethan agreed. Admiral Chin thought this was more persuasive. Another silence. Velarak, nervous, secondary eyelids flickering, spoke very quietly. Commander. The math. I know the math, Velarak. Zyrex set the device down. He looked at the human for a long moment. At the steady eyes. At the absolute, infuriating calm. 11,000 years of conquest. 42 governments broken. And in 11 months, humanity had gone from a species he'd expected to finish in 2 to this. What is your name? He asked. Ethan Cross. Special Forces. And there are more of you. 8 billion, give or take. Zyrex was quiet for a very long time. Then he reached out and pressed the communications array on his war table. Signal Admiral Chin, he said. Tell her we accept. Later, much later, after the ceasefire was signed and the ships stood down and the prisoners came home blinking into light they'd thought they'd never see again, a Crofts-Zena sociologist filed a report to the Dominion Science Directorate. It was a careful, thorough document, full of data and observed behavior and neurochemical analysis. Its conclusion was brief. The primary survival advantage of the human species is not physical. It is not technological. It is the apparent absence of the neurological mechanism that tells other species when a situation is hopeless. We do not yet know if this is a defect or an adaptation. We are inclined, after observation, to classify it as the most dangerous trait in the known galaxy. Recommendation: do not challenge humans. Under any circumstances. At all.